either the Anti-Terrorist Unlawful Activities Prevention Act or even the Sedition Act charge brought against them, and they can then be detained for months, at times for years. That is the truly heinous end of what has happened to some people who have been outspoken in a way in which the Modi government has not liked. As I said a moment ago, we don't have outright censorship, but we do have this insidious creeping system which is reducing the area where free expression can happen, and fairly significantly reducing it. For whatever the reason, is very much a chosen, deliberate target of the BJP government and of Modi in particular. And they do this by...
Hello and welcome to Infertalks, a podcast where we put you in the room with some of the biggest thought leaders from around the world. Joining us today is renowned journalist from India who's known for his upfront, bold, and dispassionate journalism. He's a recognized public intellectual who mostly rises above the fray. He's also the host of the show, The Interview on the Wire. My guest today is Mr. Karan Thapar. Mr. Thapar, welcome to Infertalks.
A pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, sir, let's start our conversation, and I want to ask you a very straightforward question, particularly on the press freedom and the freedom of expression in India. Amnesty International's latest report suggests, and I quote, "In a continuing pattern of harassment and intimidation, unlawful and politically motivated restrictions were placed on civil society organizations and human rights defenders, including activists, journalists, students, and academics." As a fellow journalist, do you have similar concerns about the press freedom in India?
I think every single Indian journalist worth his salt has those concerns, and they are deep concerns, and they are concerns that have been there for several years. It's not that we actually have official censorship, because that would be a lie. We did have official censorship from 75 to 77 when there was the emergency under Indira Gandhi. But what we have today is arguably worse. It's an insidious manner in which coercion of a variety of sorts is brought on people who are outspoken, who are critical, who are exposing. 3 or 4 things happen. First of all, there are several cases of journalists who have had either the Anti-Terrorist Unlawful Activities Prevention Act or even the Sedition Act charge brought against them, and they can then be detained for months, at times for years. That is the truly heinous end of what has happened to some people who have been outspoken in a way in which the Modi government has not liked. In other instances, proprietors lean on you to say that there are certain subjects and certain opinions that are not to be expressed, and therefore, no matter how keen you are to do it, you don't get that permission to do. In yet other instances, editors are told that certain columnists are no longer welcome, or certain types of columns written by columnists who still continue would no longer be published. And again, that leads to the same outcome. Views that should be expressed find no place in the paper. There are also instances where sponsors and advertisers have been lent upon by the government and drop off. And as you know, if the media is not sponsored or advertised on, then it's very difficult for the media to function. And that is another way in which indirect but insidious control can be exerted. And then finally, there is the self-censorship. A lot of journalists are young people. They don't necessarily come from wealthy backgrounds. They're enthusiastic, they're dedicated, they're honest, but they also need to keep their jobs. And if the threat that hangs like a sort of Damocles over you all the time is fear of losing your job and becoming economically unable to support yourself, then many people, reluctantly, but necessarily perhaps, have to kowtow and stop pushing stories to the logical conclusion, stop expressing certain views, perhaps avoiding stories altogether because, they're difficult to handle in the present circumstances. All of that is happening. And therefore, as I said a moment ago, we don't have outright censorship, but we do have this insidious creeping system which is reducing the area where free expression can happen, and fairly significantly reducing it.
Mr. Thapar, you mentioned that there's no official censorship out there, but let me cite World Press Freedom Index rankings. From 2014 to 2022, we've actually seen a decline. We've seen India fall from 140 to 150th position out of 180 countries. Let me also cite the example of The Wire, whose office was also raided by Delhi police on a complaint of a BJP politician. And then we've also seen the office of BBC raided by the tax authorities in India. How do you sort of explain this decline, and why is the government in India, especially at the center, so paranoid right now?
This decline is deeply worrying. We all in India are conscious of the fact that our rankings as a free press have fallen fairly sizably, considerably, and disturbingly. And yes, what you're talking about, in fact, are instances where pressure is brought to bear through things such as income tax raids, where the income tax case is concocted. And the impact of that is to put pressure on you to desist a particular story, or not pursue a particular line of investigation, or to hold back on criticism. As I said, this is not outright censorship, but the end result is very much the same. I think I wouldn't say the end result is different, but it's not that there are censors sitting in your office actually saying you can't do this and you can't do that. But the end result is that you can't do it, and that's why it's worrying. And the worst part of it is that when this pressure happens, there are many who decide to self-censor themselves. And you're saying precisely what I'm saying. This is a deeply worrying, insidious situation that was not the case in 2013 and 14 before the Modi government came. And it wasn't really the case in the first 2-3 years of the Modi government either. But increasingly from 2017-18 onwards, it is the case. And the worst example, and there undoubtedly it was outright censorship, is what happened in Kashmir after August the 5th, 2019. There was an internet ban that I, saying from the top of my memory, lasted for over perhaps 220 days, the longest internet ban I think there's ever been in the world. But there is also, as Anuradha Bhasin, the editor of the Kashmir Times, mentioned in an article she wrote for the New York Times on the 8th of March, a whole lot of other steps and measures that were taken to intimidate and to frighten journalists. As she points out in that New York Times article, they were constantly being called to police stations for questioning on small technical grounds, which is just harassment. But also, they were accused of such things as terrorism, income tax fraud, and a whole lot of such issues, which were designed to harass, to ensure they didn't have time to do their work, and more importantly, to send out a message that a particular type of journalism was not acceptable.
So it appears that not only certain type of media organizations for their professional journalism have also been affected, but certain individuals have also been affected. Examples are
Yes.
yourself. You actually confessed this in your recent interview to The Hindu on the release of your new book, that your career was also impacted as a result of your journalism.
Can I interrupt? I actually wrote a book about this. My book, Devil's Advocate, which came out in 2018, that is nearly 5 years ago, has a last chapter which is entirely about my problems with the Modi government, and more specifically and pertinently with Mr. Modi himself, and how I have been boycotted by channels, and how the government of the day, that is the Modi government, lent upon the proprietor of India Today, which he himself openly said to me, and I think that is mentioned in the Hindu article you referred to, that if we continue with you and renew your contract, we will not have people from the government coming to our channel any longer, which would make it almost impossible. And I can understand that, for a news channel to function. But that book, Devil's Advocate, and that last chapter has lots of references of people like Arun Jaitley, who was the finance minister and the law minister, Ram Madhav, who's the general secretary of the BJP, quite opened, or Prakash Javadekar, who was minister of information and broadcasting, all of them quite openly saying to me, why are we being told by our party not to appear on your show, not to appear on your program? What is the problem you have? And when I asked Arun Jaitley, who was the finance minister at the time, he said, don't worry, Karan, it'll blow away. I said, Arun, if it has to blow away, that means there is a problem. But it never blew away. It crystallized, solidified, fructified, and got worse.
And your very good friend, Mr. Jai Shankar, also refused to come on your show and give you an interview on his recent on release of his book also.
That's slightly inaccurate, although in essence you're right. But what he did was, and I'm referring, as I assume you're referring to the Hindu article.
Yes.
He had said to me a couple of weeks, maybe 5 or 6 before he became minister, while those elections of 2019 were happening, that my book is coming out. I'd like you very much to do the first interview. Would you be willing? And I said, I would be very happy to do it. And we were friends. We would dine at each other's homes. More often, we would be dining with a common friend, Shankar Bajpai. 6 or 7 weeks after he asked if I would do that first interview, he became foreign minister. No one was expecting it. Possibly he wasn't himself. And after that, when his book appeared 2 or 3 months down the road, I noticed that interviews had appeared in every newspaper. And I got in touch and I said, I thought your first interview you wanted done by me. And he never replied. And I wrote that letter 2 or 3 times and he never replies. And I realized at once, because I'm not a fool, that there clearly is a problem. Now that he's the minister, he's inherited the problem the government has with me. It now has become his problem too. But I should, in all fairness, add that whilst it has affected the professional relationship, in personal terms, he is polite and a helpful person to me. And that would be wrong for me not to add. He is a good personal friend still, to the extent to which one can carry on being personal friends when there is this professional problem. But on the professional side, certainly, I imagine, persona non grata.
Mr. Thapar, now let's move on to another question. And we see some of these developments that have simply just not affected the state of freedom of expression in India. It has also affected quite adversely the quality of democracy in India itself. Quite very recently, we've seen Mr. Rahul Gandhi, an opposition leader, who's been convicted on defamation charges and disqualified from his seat in Lok Sabha. Why do you think the government seems to be moving in that direction? Although he's been convicted by the court, but it just simply seems that BJP is quite very paranoid of Mr. Gandhi. Why do you think the government is perhaps moving in that direction? Let me add on to it. Is it perhaps afraid that Mr. Gandhi has been quite very popular in terms of his political movement concerning the Bharat Jodo Yatra? Or do you think that perhaps in the coming 2024 elections, Congress would be able to strike a very robust opposition coalition against BJP?
There are multiple reasons why the BJP is targeting Rahul Gandhi. And it's hard to single out any one as the main prime reason. I think you need to see all of them collectively, and they will suggest to you the many different levels at which the BJP, and perhaps Mr. Modi himself in particular, has a problem with Rahul Gandhi. And let me sketch out some of those reasons for you. The first is an antipathy for the Gandhi family, starting with Jawaharlal Nehru, the first prime minister. Almost anything and everything to do with Nehru has been effectively over the last 6 years debunked, derided, ridiculed, and deliberately pushed to the background. And in a sense, that follows down through to his daughter, Indira Gandhi, grandson, Rajiv Gandhi, great-grandson, Rahul Gandhi. A second reason is that Rahul Gandhi has been particularly sharp, at times vituperative, sometimes very piercing and effective in his personal attacks on Mr. Modi. He has personalized the attack, and I suppose the response from Mr. Modi is equally personalized. That is probably a second reason. A third reason may be a bit Machiavellian. Rahul Gandhi, as you know, has not taken his party to great political successes in any of the elections that is fought under his leadership. Congress did disastrously in 2014. I think it ended up with, I'm saying from memory, 41 or 42 seats out of 543. And in 2019, it barely improved its seat count, going up to 51 out of 543. And certainly, few people outside Congress believe that Rahul has the capacity to fight an election that would defeat Mr. Modi. However, if Rahul is the leader of the Congress party being projected as the Congress party's putative prime ministerial candidate, or better still, if the united opposition were to put him up as their combined candidate, although I think the latter is very unlikely, then it will become, in electoral terms, as the 2024 election happens, a Rahul Gandhi versus Narendra Modi fight. And that is one almost everyone believes Modi would win hands down. And so the Machiavellian interpretation is that they are deliberately taking steps to build up Rahul because they know that this is a straw man they can quite easily demolish in the 2024 election. That's the Machiavellian interpretation. There are others as well, but the net result is that Rahul Gandhi, for whatever the reason, is very much a chosen, deliberate target of the BJP government and of Modi in particular. And they do this by misrepresenting or even outright lying about things that he said. They do it by filing cases, as the conviction case you refer to happens to be, where they've deliberately distorted what he said. And clearly, the judge who convicted him didn't fully understand the difference between what Rahul said and the claim that Rahul was talking about all Modis. He wasn't. He was talking specifically about three, Lalit Modi, Nirav Modi, and Narendra Modi. But then there are also questions about the speed with which he was disqualified. 24 hours after his conviction, he was disqualified. In 2016, there's a BJP MP, Kachadia, who not only was convicted, but was not immediately disqualified and was given 16 days to seek a stay, which he managed to get, and was never disqualified. So there's discriminatory treatment that comes into being as well. But all of that would be either for the Machiavellian reason as suggested or for the other two reasons.
Mr. Thapar, now let me come on to the question of the rise of hate crimes in India in the last many years, ever since Mr. Modi has come into power. And NYT actually reports, and I quote them, that under Modi's government, violence against Muslims in India has risen and is often unpunished. His government has enacted laws and policies that target Muslims, including changes to citizenship rules that disadvantage Muslims and revocation of the special status of Kashmir. And quite very recently, you've also had Mr. Nasiruddin Shah in one of your interviews. How do you see this as a journalist, but then as a concerned citizen of India?
I've written articles. I have a regular column in the Hindustan Times, which is now 26 years old, and frequently I've written about my distress at the way Muslims are being treated. I've done lots of interviews. You mentioned the Nasiruddin Shah one. There are several others that I've done. I think what is the big change that has happened is that the communal sentiments that were latent but suppressed and never expressed have been, in a sense, legitimized by the atmosphere the Modi government has created. Also by some of the actions it's done, some of the legislation it's passed, by some of the comments and speeches ministers and BJP people make. But communal sentiment, in the sense of prejudice against another faith, is common in the subcontinent. I include your country equally in that as I do Bangladesh. But civilized governments and civilized systems found ways of ensuring that what was unspeakable and unlikable was never expressed. What people think in their hearts or their heads is obviously something no government can change. That is the way people are. But it's not expressed, it's not legitimized, it's punished, and the system works to ensure that it never finds expression. That is the big change that's happened in India increasingly from 2014. What used to be thought and hopefully suppressed is soon began being expressed, then it began being flaunted, and now it's often publicly threatened. And it's no great secret that several BJP MPs, MLAs, that's members of state legislative assemblies, ministers, say things about Muslims such as Babar ki aulad. They taunt them by calling them Abba Jan, because Muslims call their fathers Abba. They used to, at one point of time, although they were talking about Bangladeshi illegal immigrants, call them Dimak or termites. But knowing full well that you are talking about Muslims from Bangladesh, not Hindus from Bangladesh. Even the Prime Minister, although he doesn't do this frequently and he hasn't done it of late, has referred to people as unko kapdon se pehchan sakte ho, meaning you can recognize Muslims by the clothes they wear. Or he makes speeches where he talks about the contrast between Shamshan Ghat and Kabristan. And that is a form of language that every Indian understands. You're talking about Hindus versus Muslims.
So, Mr. Thapar, let me interject.
He talks about the 80-20 divide. Again, we all know what he's talking about. That sort of taunting is what is new and horrible and despicable.
Let me interject you over here and ask you, do you think there's any hope to ensure that such incidents can actually be prevented in future going forward by India's civil society and India's political parties? Or do you think they're completely and entirely hapless before the BJP?
I think civil society and Indian political parties can act to curb and then perhaps later to prevent. Whether they are is another matter. I think a lot of political parties, particularly perhaps Congress, are very concerned about their loss of popular support. The fact that they're down to just 50 seats out of 543, and they're worried that what they say may be misrepresented to Hindus, who are after 80% of the country, and it might even bring forth a worse treatment of Muslims who are 14-15% of the country. But there is something that no one must ever forget. The Muslim population of India, going by the 2011 census, was roughly 175 million. Today, 14 or 13 years later, it is undoubtedly 200 million. That is a very sizable number of people. There are most countries where the population is less than that, and yet that is our total Muslim population. And remember, Muslims don't live in any one part of the country. You have Muslims from Kerala to Kashmir, from UP, Bihar to Gujarat, Maharashtra, Calcutta. They're spread all over. And the big concern is that, and people are aware of this, that this is a huge number of people, and you will fracture the unity of your country. You will unravel the web that holds us together if you take this beyond a particular point. And therefore, there are people standing up and saying, stop it, we must stop. Which is why also you are beginning to see, even within the BJP, a fledgling attempt, I admit it's only fledgling, to rein things in. The Prime Minister and the BJP have begun talking about a deliberate and conscious outreach to what are called Pasmanda Muslims, which are the majority of the Muslim population, which are classified as backward in the sense of not well educated, in the sense of economic status. And they fit in with the vast majority of the Indian population. And the deliberate attempt is to reach out to them in terms of not just income support, education reservations, job reservations, and other such things. You also have at the Home Minister, and this is very recent, meeting with Muslim elders, former bureaucrats, former governors, election commissioners, lieutenant governors, to try and sort out the problems by toning down the rhetoric and by increasing the meeting between the two. Even the head of the RSS, Mr. Bhagwat, has had one or two such meetings. Now, these are very fledgling attempts, but they are, I think, reflections of the fact that you take this too far and you can fracture this country very badly.
Mr. Thapar, let me ask you one more question, and this is now on Kashmir. On Kashmir, we actually see that after the measures of August 5th of 2019, it seems the BJP government wants to unilaterally settle the question of an internationally recognized dispute. Does it seem to you that India under Modi has thrown international law to the winds?
No, because what happened in Kashmir has got nothing to do with international law. Don't forget that you have taken fairly similar steps to try and give provincial status to Gilgit-Baltistan, and you have an elected government over there. And if you feel free to try and change the nature of administration and governance in Gilgit-Baltistan, the Indian government has every right. Whether it's doing the right thing or not is another matter, but they have every right to remove Article 370 and also to downgrade the state to union territory status, or to divide it so that Jammu and Kashmir are one entity and Ladakh are another. That's very similar to what you're doing in Gilgit-Baltistan. I'm not talking about the desirability of what the Indian government's done or the legality of the way they've done it. Both of those can be questioned and are being questioned. The legality and the constitutionality is in the Supreme Court. The case is going to start being heard, although the Supreme Court has taken an unconscionably long time to hear it. The desirability is one that is being questioned by people in common discussions, in Kashmir most of all, but also in the interview with Satyapal Malik, which I did yesterday. He was the governor at the time, who thought that downgrading the status from statehood to union territory was wrong. But the fact that the government has the right to do it, because it has got nothing to do with the world outside, just as you're changing the governance of Gilgit-Baltistan, has got very little to do the world outside. So we must be very careful about the point we're making. If you're questioning whether it was desirable in terms of constitutional law, whether it's desirable in terms of the sentiment of the people, that's another matter. But to say the Indian government has no right to do it, they do. Just as you have a right to do whatever you're doing to Gilgit-Baltistan. And I pointed that out in an interview with Moeed Yusuf, your NSA. When I first interviewed him, I think that was way back in June, July of 2021. It wasn't a distinction he was prepared to accept. We quarreled over it, but it is the truth.
But Mr. Thapar, if such is the case, as you put it, then why is the Human Rights Watch, which it certainly quotes in its recent report, that after August 2019, the authorities have invoked the Jammu and Kashmir Public Safety Act, as well as terrorism allegations, to conduct raids and arbitrarily detain journalists, activists?
That is a comment being made by human rights about the way in which the government is seeking to tackle, perhaps suppress, the popular response against what the government did.
But Mr. Thapar, allow me to complete my question, please.
Whether the government had the right to do it. The two are different. If you can change the government, remember, Gilgit-Baltistan is as much a part of India in Indian eyes as Jammu and Kashmir is.
But Mr. Thapar, my question is, sir, my question is,
invaders walked in.
Mr. Thapar, my question is, by carrying out such actions, don't you think BJP is actually sending an entirely wrong signal to Kashmiris in the valley that their rights and political choices simply do not matter, irrespective?
No, hang on a second. Let's not get into this discussion too far, because it is very difficult to talk about this in rational terms without it becoming an India-Pakistan problem. Neither you nor I will be doing that. Let's be honest about it.
No, it's not.
Just as your question is designed to deliberately keep out of the picture Gilgit-Baltistan and make what's happening in Jammu Kashmir look unique, different, and wrong.
No, I'm not trying to make that kind of a comparison, Mr. Thapar. I'm just simply saying the state of human rights and the way the rights of the Kashmiris are being trampled upon by BJP, just as the rights of
the right to answer it without an interruption. You may not like my answer. That is your prerogative. You may disagree with it. That is your prerogative. But if you've asked me a question, courtesy does require you let me answer it.
Indeed.
And then you want to disagree, you can. Most of my answer has been talked over by you, so the audience won't know either what I've said and perhaps even what you asked. So I think, in fairness, all I would like to point out is that whilst the manner in which the status of Kashmir was changed can be constitutionally questioned, and I personally believe it was constitutionally done the wrong way, and whilst we can also talk about the desirability in terms of the impact on the sentiments of the people, and again, I think it was hurtful and it was wrong, there was a given specific promise on the grounds of which they acceded to India, and that promise has been breached. But there is no great difference, really, at all, between what our government has done wrongly and what your government has done in Gilgit-Baltistan. And that's the point I'm making. But let's leave it there. I thank you for this, and I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thapar. It was lovely having you for this conversation. You have a great day ahead and a great weekend.
You too. You too.
Thank you so much for staying with us through this conversation with Mr. Karan Thapar. Our team works very hard to make this work possible, and it would mean the world to us if you could like and share our content to show your support. And if you'd like to stay informed on upcoming podcasts and other work, please hit the bell icon.